Hi 10B students. This is a recording of the oral commentary example that I gave on Wednesday. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the passage through, and when you read your passage in class it doesn't count for your 6 to 7 minutes. And then after I read the passage I'll start with my oral commentary. I got bored sitting on the wash bowl after a while, so I backed up a few feet and started doing this tap dance just for the hell of it. I was amusing myself. I can't really tap dance or anything, but it was a stone floor in the can and it was good for tap dancing. I started imitating one of those guys in the movies, in one of those musicals. I hate the movies like Poison, but I get a bang imitating them. Old Stradlater watched me in the mirror while he was shaving. All I need's an audience. I'm an exhibitionist. I'm the goddamn governor's son, I said. I was knocking myself out, tap dancing all over the place. He doesn't want me to be a tap dancer. He wants me to go to Oxford. But it's in my goddamn blood, tap dancing. Old Stradlater laughed. He didn't have too bad a sense of humor. It's the opening night of the Ziegfeld Follies. I was getting out of breath. I had hardly any wind at all. The leading man can't go on. He's drunk as a bastard. So who did they get to take his place? Me. That's who. The little old goddamn governor's son. So this passage occurs when Stradlater is getting ready for his date with Jane, and Holden follows him into the bathroom and starts tap dancing and entertaining Stradlater. At this point, Holden doesn't know that it's Jane that Stradlater is going on a date with. This passage exemplifies Holden's feelings of inferiority and his attempt to overcompensate. The first place where we see Holden's feelings of inferiority is through the tap dancing. Tap dancing is repeated 6 times throughout the passage, and there's a sense that Holden is dancing in order to entertain and take some of the attention away from Stradlater. It's Holden's way of overcompensating for a situation where he feels inferior to Stradlater and doesn't know how to reclaim some of that attention. Holden states that he really can't tap dance or anything, and so what Holden is doing is he's doing a version of tap dancing that is based on what he thinks tap dancing is. And so in this way, Holden is imitating tap dancing in order to overcompensate for the fact that he feels insecure and inferior in this situation to Stradlater. Stradlater, in the meantime, is shaving and getting ready for his date. And so even the act of shaving demonstrates an element of physical maturity with Stradlater, that Stradlater has enough hair that he needs to shave and prepare for his date. And so this is a way that Holden overcompensates for the situation and shifts some of the attention from Stradlater and his date to Holden and Holden's performance. The second place where Holden exemplifies his inferiority is the fact that it's set in a bathroom. We watch as Holden follows Stradlater into the bathroom, and so Holden is in the act of following someone, and so he's not the leader in this case, he's the follower. And a lot of the elements of the bathroom are focused on. There's the wash bowl, there's the can, and there's also the mirror. And the mirror is really important because it becomes a symbol of Holden's sense of inferiority. We know that Stradlater is watching Holden through the mirror, and so Stradlater is in front of the mirror shaving and sees Holden's reflection as Holden is behind him dancing. This is really symbolic of the fact that Holden isn't really seen as a real person here. He's seen as a reflection, and so his reflection is what Stradlater is actually looking at. And this really represents the fact that Holden is seen as secondary to Stradlater, that Stradlater is focused on his shaving and he's focused on himself, and he's only seeing Holden because he's seeing him in a reflection. He's not turned towards him. And so it's almost as if Holden is in the background desperately trying to get Stradlater's attention and overcompensate for the fact that he's not being paid attention to. A third example that reflects Holden's sense of inferiority is the fact that Holden takes on this persona of the governor's son. It's evident that Holden hates movies and he hates musicals, and he doesn't like the idea of imitation, and yet this is what he does. He takes on the persona of the governor's son and actually uses lines from this. And this is from a film called The Ziegfeld Follies, and it really exemplifies how Holden feels inferior here. He states that he doesn't want me to be a tap dancer, he wants me to go to Oxford. And so while Holden takes on this role of the governor's son, we know that the governor's son wants to be a tap dancer, and yet it says he wants me to go to Oxford. So already there is this dichotomy that's set up where the governor's son wants to go to Oxford, which is a school in the UK. But he also, what he really wants to do is he wants to be a tap dancer. So he's being pushed towards academia even though he wants to be a tap dancer. And I think this is a parallel with Holden's situation, where Holden doesn't want to be in Pensy Prep. He doesn't want to go to all these schools. He wants to do what he wants to do. And so by taking on this persona of the governor's son, Holden is able to make the decision that he wants to make, which is not to go to school, or not to go to Oxford in this case. He's rejecting the idea of what the father figure, or the he pronoun that's repeated twice, wants him to do. So this he in some ways could be a symbol of Holden's father or Holden's parents, or the idea of authority. It might also be the larger idea of society, that the he represents society as a whole. Society wants Holden to be a certain thing. It wants him to be in school. It wants him to follow the norms that a child or a teen would follow. And Holden doesn't really want to follow those norms. He doesn't want to follow what society tells him to do. Another place that highlights the idea of Holden's inferiority is the line that states, the leading man can't go on, he's drunk as a bastard. And this is really important because it shows how Holden is trying to overcompensate for not being the leading man. While he takes on that persona of the governor's son in the context of the Ziegfeld Follies takes over as the leading man, because the leading man cannot go on. In this case, it's as if Holden wants to take over for Stradlater. Perhaps Stradlater is seen as that leading man. It's been evident that Stradlater represents the idea of manliness. We've seen Holden earlier talk about the fact that Stradlater is a really exemplary man. And so perhaps Holden's insecurity about his manliness comes out in this sentence when he gets to take on that role of leading man. It also states that he's drunk as a bastard, so it's not as if Holden has taken over the leading man position by his own merit. He's gotten the leading man position almost by default because the leading man was too drunk to continue on. And so this really shows this idea of Holden trying to overcompensate and take on that role in this imagined scenario. And so he creates the scenario where he almost gets to become Stradlater, or take over the situation where Stradlater gets to go on this date. And this is where we see Holden imagining the situation as what he would like, even though this is not the reality. So this passage really shows Holden's inferiority and his attempt to overcompensate. It's visible through this idea of tap dancing, where Holden tries to become this tap dancer who doesn't really know how to tap dance. Become visible in the symbol of the mirror, where Holden isn't necessarily a real character. He's seen as a reflection through Stradlater's eyes. It also becomes visible as Holden takes on that persona of the governor's son and tries to make that choice to be the tap dancer as opposed to being the academic. And it's also visible when Holden takes on that role of leading man in this imagined scenario, where he gets to take that power and become the focus. So this passage exemplifies Holden's feelings of inferiority and his attempt to overcompensate.